Hello, this is Digital Accessibility, the people behind the progress. I'm Joe Walensky, the creator and host of this series. And as an accessibility professional myself, I find it very interesting as to how others have found their way into this profession. So let's meet one of those people right now and hear about their journey. All right, well, let's get started with another episode where I get the opportunity to talk with an accessibility practitioner. And today I am talking with Mary Jo Mueller. How are you today, Mary Jo?
Really well, thank you.
Well, I'm at my home office on Vashon Island, which is near Seattle, which is where Blink's headquarters office is. Where are you talking to us from?
I'm on the opposite end of the country from you. I'm in Satellite Beach, Florida, over near NASA.
All right. Well, yeah, NASA is one of our clients, so I have the opportunity to work with them quite a bit. But it's great to have you as part of this program, and I'm looking forward to hearing about your work with accessibility. But always a good place to start is if you could just describe what things you're currently involved with.
Well, currently I work for, actually my entire career, I've been at IBM. I am the Accessibility Standards Program Manager, and kind of what that means is I lead the worldwide team working on accessibility standards, and I also work on accessibility policy around the world. So just kind of coordinating those efforts and making sure that we have an influence over standards and policy worldwide.
And so you mentioned worldwide. So your position is one where you're communicating with all the different parts of IBM, different departments, divisions, and so on.
Yeah, we communicate with different, IBM's a global company. So the group that I'm in is the accessibility team, IBM Accessibility. And we do provide all the guidance. We basically distill all of the standards information and the policy information and distill it into guidance that we give to IBM developers, management, everybody around the world on how to make IBM products accessible, how to report that they're accessible, and so on.
Well, I want to get in a little bit more detail about your work, but we also like to find out kind of what the journey was for people as they found their way into accessibility. So maybe if you could think back, what were some of the earliest things that you found that either prepared you for accessibility or where you became aware of it?
Well, my journey into accessibility was actually rather serendipitous. I had my first child and went on a leave of absence for a year. And then when I came back, my manager had moved. I used to be working in like communications subsystems. I worked on AS400 and, electrical engineer by education. So I was working in a completely different area. But when I came back to IBM working full time, my manager had moved to the accessibility team. And so I was plunged into this accessibility team. I had awareness of disabilities and people with disabilities because my dad had had a stroke when I was in high school and he was left disabled and unable to work. And so I had an awareness and a background and feelings about that. And so when I wound up in this team, it was like, aha, you could actually do technology work for people with disabilities. I was like, wow, this is awesome. And so I worked initially on products for SpeechViewer, which was a product for speech therapists to help their patients learn how to pronounce phonemes more clearly and be understood better when they're speaking. And so that was my first plunge into that. So there was a lot of learning to do. And but I was kind of excited to do it because I felt like it was making a difference.
Well, it sounds like though you at least there was some infrastructure there, people already working on this, where you were brought into a place where you had some peers to be able to lean on to get going.
Yeah, there was an established group. It was called, in IBM, it was called Special Needs Systems at the time, but it eventually became IBM Accessibility, which is the current name of the organization. And yes, there were people that were already established in that field. And there was actually, IBM was making various products for people with disabilities. And so they had a lot of knowledge to impart on me, and that was really helpful.
And then you said you had to do a lot of learning. And so was that just investigating, what resources available through the community, or had your company built up a library of things to work on, or how did your education in that area move forward?
At that point, this was really kind of early on. This was before Section 508. This was before. This was. I've been in my career a long time. So, yeah, there was none of that kind of thing. It was more of, this is like a philanthropic effort for IBM. We want to make a difference for people with disabilities. What are the disabilities? What can we do? Is there any assistive technology we can help with? And this was back in the days when, Jim Thatcher was working on the first, screen readers and all that kind of thing. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but I worked with him at some point, and he was a great mentor for me. He was a great, fun person to be around. And I eventually wound up working on screen readers myself. I worked on the screen reader for OS2. With Jim and Rich Schwertfeger and some other names that a lot of people who've been in accessibility a while know all these names. I got to work with them. It was really a privilege. I learned a lot, and it was a great environment for learning. Not saying that today isn't also a good learning environment, but coming on board with zero knowledge of making technology accessible, it was a great place to get started. And I got to learn a lot about user needs. We ran beta programs with the users and got to get direct user feedback and hear their user needs and hear the struggles that they had with their technology. So for me, I think that was one of the best lessons that I learned was working with people with disabilities and learning from them and understanding where they're coming from and the things that they're trying to do and where they're meeting roadblocks, and then trying to come up with solutions for that.
Well, with IBM being such a large organization and so influential, at that time, then was IBM involved in helping to contribute to the standards that were being developed by the World Wide Web Consortium? And
yeah, so in that really early time, there was no standards yet because there was no 508. The web, when I first started working in accessibility, the web wasn't even a thing. It was in its infancy, if so. And then as my career progressed, yes, the web started coming into play. Some of my peers, I wasn't directly working on standards at the time, but there were some of my peers like Jim and Phil and others who were working on standards. And then I had a break in my career. So that was kind of an interesting thing. I had my second child, and I left work for 9 years. And then I came back. So when I came back, I was hired back into accessibility, and it was because of my already prior knowledge. And they didn't have to bring me up to speed on what is accessibility and what does that mean and what does that mean for users and what does that mean for IBM. I already kind of was already there. So it was a very easy in for me to get right back into the accessibility field, which was awesome because technology had completely marched on. The programming was completely different. I was totally not familiar with, all of the beyond HTML, plain HTML. I wasn't familiar with any of the programming of web technologies. So I thought I was going to have a difficult time getting back into work after being gone for 9 years, but it actually turned out it wasn't that difficult.
And so sometimes when there's a gap like that, we find that things have changed a lot, and then in other areas we think doesn't seem like anything moved forward at all. Well, I think a lot of us find that it's been a theme that's come up a lot in this program. How was it for you?
That is very, very true. So I was not used to working remote with a lot of people. That had changed a lot. And I wasn't used to that. I was used to being with the in-person group because at the time I had left, we were all co-located in the same spot. And so, you need to talk to so-and-so about whatever, walk down the hall, have a conversation, get it over with. It was a little bit of an adjustment for me to work with a team that was coast to coast and that kind of thing, and not face to face. And it was a little bit of an adjustment there. Of course, the technology had changed, and standards were actually a thing when I joined. WCAG was working on WCAG 2.0, W3C, and 508 obviously was there. And the 508 refresh was getting underway. So I got involved in those things because, I still have my knowledge about people with disabilities and their user needs, and I could still contribute to all of that. And so I just kind of jumped in and started working on that, and wrote a white paper with a couple other people. And it was a really good way to get back into the working world. And I'm really glad I had my accessibility background because it really was helpful to me getting back into things. I did find that there was a lot of problems that seemed to repeat themselves in the technologies, and the web content was no different. And it just seemed like you take 2 steps forward and 1 step back when you wind up with new technologies. It's like, oh yeah, accessibility, we forgot about that kind of thing. And it's like, well, how can you forget about that? We've known about that for years. So in those regards, it seemed some things didn't change as much as I had hoped, but there's still a community out there of accessibility experts who care very much, people with disabilities who care very much. And this is all like a partnership that we have to continue to ensure that accessibility is not forgotten, that it is incorporated as early as possible, because redesign is way too costly.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to talk about your community involvement before we're finished, but just continuing on kind of from where we are here, what are the types of things how are things done within your organization to educate people about accessibility and what their role is in that? It sounds like you do a lot of work across the organization. How does that end up propagating or happening within individual divisions, departments, and so on?
Well, IBM being a large organization, we're somewhat process driven. So that kind of helps because we created accessibility processes and education. And then we have, web content and tooling that we've created to help the organization to learn, consume, learn, do, and test, right? So those Those are all important aspects of completing accessibility process. We have created a website that does a lot of the role-based or where you are in your process-based accessibility that kind of gives you ideas on what you should be doing at what stage of your project. And we get a lot of user feedback from IBMers of what they need, what they don't understand, and we try to have that feedback loop also with the consumers of what we do, our tooling, and try to keep up with the standards changes as well. I mean, so everything kind of rolls in, and we just keep iterating on both the processes, the tooling, the guidance, all that, just to keep it all current, and also we have to be able to report how well we're doing in our product accessibility conformance reports. So we use the Vpat. We're involved in industry associations that help develop the Vpat. And that's how you found out about me with IAAP presentation that I did with Michelle Van Duzer. And we were involved in the development of the Vpat so we can report accessibility and how well our products are meeting those standards and requirements to whoever's looking to purchase IBM products.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. As you brought that up, so the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, a great organization with lots of resources to help people. I'm a member of that as well, and they have webinars that they provide, as well as other resources. And one of those was one that you mentioned that I attended, that you were involved with the Vpat. Why don't you talk a little bit, specifically about the Vpat? I don't think we've covered that in this episode series. Maybe give a brief description of that, and yeah, some people might be interested in what that's all about.
Okay, so Vpat, let's talk about the acronym itself first, because we tend to use a lot of acronyms and then people don't know what that means. So a Vpat is a voluntary product accessibility template. And it's a template that contains the requirements for accessibility. Currently, it has three standards, worldwide standards that are used. WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It has 508, the revised 508 standards, as well as the European EN 301549, which is used in several different regulations in Europe, the European Union, as well as beyond, because other countries like Australia are adopting it, and Canada are adopting the EN 301549. So those are all accessibility standards, and the Vpat contains all those requirements just as a list. It doesn't have all the details that are in the standards, but as a list so that you can report how well you meet each of those requirements, and give explanations if you don't meet something, if it's just, you forgot alt text on, a certain screen, but it's not going to affect users because it's not, an image that is really all that meaningful, that kind of thing. You can report all of that, and then people who buy your products, you can provide them with that information, and then they can make informed decisions when they're purchasing products.
One of the common things that software organizations seem to always be looking for is they're always looking for certification or something that has the blue ribbon that this is quote unquote officially approved. That's really not what Vpat's all about. Maybe talk about kind of that difference there, where we really don't have, there's not a certification authority that.
Yeah, there is no certification authority. Yeah, the Vpat is really meant for for products to self-report their accessibility, right? So that you have to hopefully, hopefully they're doing all of the things that they should be doing that leads up to this report. I mean, you have to test, you have to develop and test to the accessibility standards, and then you can reliably report on that. You can't just go and say, check, 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 I meet all these requirements, and you have nothing to back it. That is not a good scenario, because then you're not being very truthful about the accessibility status of your product, and it's not giving your buyers any information that's helpful to them to compare products. As well, it becomes, it can become part of the legal documentation on a bid. So you really do want to be truthful, because you can be held liable for what's in there. So you want to make sure that it's up to date and correct as much as possible.
And on the positive side, it is very helpful to an organization, because it represents that accessibility is something that you're being proactive about. And
Exactly.
I think it's important for a lot of organizations to understand that lawsuits and legal actions tend to occur in the areas where there's just been,
no action.
Neglect.
No action. Yeah.
No action. And just the, doing this, shows that you've been proactive about it.
Yeah, and that you're actually trying. It's really hard to be 100%, accessible in 100% of everything. But as long as you're truthful about that and are still striving to improve release after release, and prove that you care, you address user concerns, that kind of thing, kind of shows that you care and that you're willing to, work towards a more accessible world.
Well, I'll include some links to the IAAP training related to that in the show notes for this. Getting back to the types of things that you're involved with at IBM, are there any particular initiatives that you're excited about now, or are there things looking forward that you think might become part of the activities at IBM moving into the future?
Let me think about that for a second. I think that from my view, I'm looking forward to new technologies. They do kind of have their own challenges for accessibility. When you talk about virtual worlds and virtual reality and this and that, I am excited about where that could go, because actually it could also open up some new opportunities. And though I'm not directly involved in that, I don't think IBM currently has any VR, AR type of products at this point. That still, there is some interesting things going on with data visualization. That's something that IBM does a lot, and I'm really interested to see where things go and in making that accessible. There's a lot of challenges with that as well. But personally, for our team, because we are involved in standards and policy, we're always on the lookout for what's happening worldwide, picking up standards. What are they doing? New regulations, because the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is getting it has been ratified by a lot of countries, and that means that they're going to be putting in place regulations for accessibility, and that includes accessible technology. And so part of what I do is just make sure that the standards that they require and the things that they require can allow for a global market. You want them to harmonize between countries and not have unique accessibility requirements per country, because then you'll lose your economy of scale. And you'd have to produce a specific product for a specific country because they've modified the regulations so much and the standards. New horizons for people with cognitive disabilities. I think that's very interesting as well. The next generation of the web content accessibility guidelines, version 3 of WCAG, which is being worked on. We're hoping to include more requirements that address people with cognitive disabilities and improve upon the usability of the standard itself and the understandability of the standard itself. So I think that's, for a standards person, that's pretty interesting. I don't know if it's interesting to everybody, but
it's definitely interesting to me because I've worked with people who have had traumatic brain injury accidents and things like that, and it's probably the area of accessibility that I think organizations have worked on the least relative to other types of physical challenges, and I think a lot of it is because it's really hard.
It is hard, and different users' needs can be different and conflicting, and so coming up with a standard that can address everybody is very challenging. But as somebody who's of an engineering mind, challenges are kind of fun.
Well, Mary Jo, I want to thank you for taking the time here to talk a little bit about your background and share your thoughts about today and the future. And hopefully we'll get together at an in-person conference sometime again soon.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've looked at it, but IBM does have resources and a website that can help people learn about accessibility and web accessibility, as well as free tooling available. So check it out.
Yeah, I'll make sure I get the proper link from you, and we'll include that in the show notes here as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Hey, we did it.
Yay.
Great, let me turn the recording.